Hi everyone, it's Elisa and it's December, which means it's winter squash season. There are many different varieties of winter squash. There's acorn squash, which is a smaller variety of squash with a dark green and orange exterior. Acorn squash normally has a mildly sweet and nutty flavor. Delicata squash, which is another smaller variety of squash, has a cylindrical shape and a yellow exterior with green stripes. Delicata squash has a mild flavor similar to that of sweet potatoes. Butternut squash, which is a more popular variety, has a pear shape and a cream-colored exterior. This kind of squash has the sweetest flavor of all the varieties of winter squash. And finally, there's pumpkin, which is actually a type of squash. Although pumpkins are often used as decoration, you can't actually eat them. As you may know, pumpkins are round and normally have an orange exterior. Pumpkins have a sweet and earthy flavor. People have been eating squash for over 10,000 years. We used to only eat the seeds, but now we know that we can eat the whole squash. Today, we're going to be using delicata squash, which gets its name from its delicate skin, which is edible, unlike many other varieties of squash. Squash is a great source of vitamin A, vitamin C, and fiber, which is important for our eye health and digestion. Delicata squash is a type of winter squash, meaning you can go to a local farm and pick some up today. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, why would I go to a farm instead of just going to a grocery store? Well, by going to our local farm and picking our own vegetables, we can ensure that we're getting the freshest veggies that will be more flavorful and nutritious than the ones that we can get at a grocery store because they're not traveling nearly as far to get to us. The squash that I will be using for today's recipe, I got at Max Apples here at Londonderry, New Hampshire. Today I'm going to show you how to prepare and roast delicata squash. For this recipe, you will need 2 delicata squash, 3 tablespoons of olive or canola oil, and salt and pepper to taste. When cooking with squash, we want it to be firm and heavy. Avoid any squash that has a crinkly outside. First, we're going to wash the squash under some cold water and dry it with a towel. You can eat the skin of this type of squash, so no need to peel it. We are going to take our squash and cut off both ends. Next, we're going to cut it in half lengthwise. This particular variety of squash is easier to cut, but other varieties can be harder to cut, so be careful if you are preparing other varieties of squash. Be sure to ask your parents for help with this step. Next, we're going to scoop out the seeds. You can save the seeds for later, rinse them off and dry them, and bake them with some oil and salt for a delicious snack. Now place the cut side down on a cutting board and begin cutting your smiles, about a ½ inch thick. Be sure to ask your parents for help with this step as well. Once you've cut out all your smiles, place them in a bowl and add the 3 tablespoons of oil, and then add the salt and pepper to taste. If you want a sweeter taste, you can also sprinkle on some cinnamon. And then we're going to toss the squash to get it evenly coated and then pour the squash onto an aluminum-lined baking sheet. Make sure the squash are evenly spaced and in a single layer on the baking sheet. Place into a 350-degree oven for 15 to 20 minutes or until a fork goes through easily. Alright, so this is what your squash smiles should look like. If you have any leftover smiles, you can store them in the fridge, and if you have any leftover squash that isn't cut up, you can just leave that on the counter for later. Thank you so much for cooking with me today. I hope you enjoyed the smiles.